of times the messaging is you've got to have it all figured out, and you've got to have it all figured out right now. And it's not what do I want to do first, it's what do I want to do for the rest of my life, right? And so he's here just to share a little bit of his story and how it doesn't necessarily have to be like that, okay? So this is definitely informal. So he's going to invite you to ask questions. You know, if he says something that intrigues you, you're allowed to follow up with it. So don't be shy, okay? So, Jan, the floor is yours. I'm glad you're here.
Cool. So like she was saying, literally in the middle of this, I can get on a roll and just start rambling. If I say something, you're like, oh, I really want to know more about that. Just throw something out, or even just say something like, hold on. Can we revisit that for a second? And then if I actually will be answering it later on in the presentation, I'll just let you know. Be like, hey, it'll be coming up in a couple of slides. Cool? All right, rock on. So, Jan Almasy, looks like Jan, pronounced like you're about to fall asleep. The amount of times
I've had someone who's named that way.
The amount of times I've had to use that intro is obscene. All the time I have to say that, right? Because everybody wants to say Jan, they say Ian because they think it's misspelled. I get Juan, but I don't really fit in that category either, so it's like, all right, there's the name, right? Normal kid from Canton South. And the reason why I say that is because as you look at this presentation that we go through, I'm going to take you through all of the phases that I went through from 8th grade until here, right? I'm only 26, so I know I say only, and you guys are probably like, dang, he's 26. But I don't feel that far removed, right? Like, I just went through this not too long ago, and building this presentation really let me go back and kind of start to think about some of the things that I encountered. All right, so for a little bit more context, I was born and raised right down the street. If you want to scroll up. Woo! Good job. All right, this was me 7th and 8th grade, right? Proudly holding my chickens in the Stark County Fair. All right, this period of my life, I was homeschooled. I hadn't been to public school yet. I spent the majority of my time reading books. I was maybe involved in 1 or 2 sports, but being homeschooled, I didn't have a whole lot of friends. Right? So I never really got to establish a group of people. So what I did instead was got lost in being a nerd. Like, I just loved reading. I loved playing video games. RuneScape was my downfall when I first came out. Right? And you got to think, this is back like 2013, 2010.
2007. It says on the
2007
bottom
is
of the
RuneScape?
picture.
Yeah, this is 2007 right here. Yeah. So in that period of time, I'm trying to figure out who I am. Right? I didn't really have any idea. I was just kind of like riding the waves, you know? Next thing I do, I go to high school. I'm going to scroll up. This is me freshman year. Okay? Me now. Me freshman year. All right? A little bit of a difference, at least I like to think so. Okay? The glow up is real. Truth moment. I got bullied all the time for being that weird kid. Right? Problem was, I didn't know what weird really meant. So I was like, I can't fix something that I don't know how to fix. Right? It's just like, all right, you're weird, and it wasn't for any other reason. Looking back on it now, then I just didn't really have a friend group to attach myself to. Right? Previous slide, we're thinking about homeschooling. I came into high school freshman year and didn't know anybody. I just got off the bus, like walked up to the front door, and I was like, cool, now I have to deal with all of these people. Anytime those come up, perfect. Look at that, same wavelength. So anytime I would come up to the school, I was just like anxious, right? I didn't know who I was going to talk to that day. I didn't know if I was going to have anybody to sit with at lunch, or if I was going to even be able to eat my lunch, because half the time before I could get to the table, it was smack out of my hands. Right? I was in like this in-between period. Now if we go into sophomore year here, this is just the top half, right? So this is like straightening my hair, wearing Vans all the time, really rode my skateboard to school, painted my nails black, sang in a screamo band, like did the whole 9 yards, right? Because I was just really into My Chemical Romance and Good Charlotte.
My sister is too.
Into Good Charlotte and My Chemical Romance, they're both great bands, right? I still listen to them now. So, truth moment, at this period of my life, I started drinking and smoking a lot to fit in, right? Because the only ways that I could figure out to establish myself with a group and basically just get protection. Like, I just wanted somebody to have my back, right? And the only people that I could find that were going to have my back were the other people that were labeled outcasts, right? The kids that were constantly getting in trouble, because I was also one of those kids that at the time was kind of getting in trouble. And at the same time that I was doing that, right, so this was like survival mode. I just needed to find a group to be able to attach to. The other thing that I did at the time, though, and this is where two different versions of myself started to be created. Right, the one version was this version that was after school, hanging out, stealing my dad's liquor and replacing it with maple syrup and water so that it looked the same color, right? And the other half was like, I'm going to start getting involved in sports. Because I really felt, if you want to stay on that slide for just a little bit longer, I really felt at the time that I was like, hey, I've wrestled since I was a little kid. I wonder if I could pull this off in high school. And it gave me a family. Like getting into sports, and then as you'll see on the next slide when we get there, getting into a whole bunch of other activities gave me a group of people, and it started to show me that like, oh, I can get this group of people without having to do all of these things behind the scenes, right? And I can get this protection, I can push myself without this other half. So we want to scroll. So junior year happens, right? I become a 3-sport athlete. I was in the band. I sang in the choir. I remember being in the wrestling room all the time and having to leave practices early to go to SOS performances. You want to talk about getting crap from your buddies on a sports team. Every single time I went to go sing, they were like, oh, you're skipping out on practice, bro? Like, you're in varsity. Where are you going to go sing? No, you can't do that. You don't want to know what happened, though? I sang on scholarship at Walsh, $2,000 a semester a cappella. Worth it. 100% worth it to go and actually let myself kind of experience that, even though it wasn't necessarily what was on the same page with all of my friends that were on the sports team. At the same time I'm doing all of this, right? I'm like in NHS, I'm playing football, I'm lettering and wrestling, I got onto the tennis team. I was addicted to pills. I was taking a bunch of Percocet all the time. And this made that rift even worse. Like in the previous slide, I was kind of talking about how there was like these two different versions of me that I felt like were being formed. My junior year, that really started to get even more intense, right? Because I had this forward-facing version of me that everybody was congratulating me on. They were like, good job, like I can't believe that you're doing this. This is super exciting that you're in these multiple sports and you're in NHS and you're involved in all this stuff, like good job. And in the back of my mind, I was like, if they only knew, they wouldn't be giving me these compliments, right? It's like I, myself, despite all of these other people telling me you're worth something, you have potential, you have all of these things going for you, internally, my brain was still telling myself, they don't know you, they're lying to you. Okay? And I want you guys to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, because as we continue to go through the presentation, you'll realize that it wasn't other people lying to me, it was me lying to myself. Okay. Next slide. Scroll up. Okay, senior year. So, made it. And as we can see, right, go from about yay tall with glasses and acne and overweight and not super happy with myself to like, okay, now on the surface, right, looks like I'm way happier with myself, right? Junior and senior year, between the two, my grandfather passed away. Now that's a big deal for me because my grandpa was kind of like my dad, right? My dad wasn't around a ton when I was a kid, not really any fault of his own, other than the fact that he was a traveling salesman, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. Obviously, she was homeschooling us, so he just had to travel a lot, and so he wasn't really around when I was, up until I was like 9 or 10 years old. So instead of getting to spend a bunch of time with him, I spent a bunch of time with my grandpa, right? So he basically raised me. He would take me to wrestling practices, he came to my football games, he came to my, my tennis matches and all this stuff. So when he passed away, it was kind of like a double hit, right? It's like I lost my grandfather, but I also lost a father figure. And that broke me. And like all of this stuff that was being built up on the forward-facing side, the NHS, the multiple sports, all the other stuff, I didn't think that it mattered, right? It's like all of that was for nothing. Because now, like, this person that I really looked up to, and I was only 16, 17 at the time, I was like, I needed you to be around so that I could ask you questions, because I don't know where I need to go. I don't know what I want to be. I don't know who I am yet, right? So when he died, I was like, crap, now what? So the next couple of months following that were definitely a roller coaster. I almost OD'd, because I just was not in a good place. You know, I had a bunch of friends, and we were all kind of hanging out, and I woke up that next morning, nobody was around, and I realized that all of those people that I had believed were my friends, they just kind of abandoned me, right? And so for me, that really stung. Following that up, I almost went to juvie because I stacked 12 people into a crew cab F-150 and decided to drive from party to party at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday and ran a red light, got pulled over with 12 people in an F-150 at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I had to call my dad to come take possession of the vehicle, which was phenomenal. And then all of those people that were in that vehicle, I had to call their parents on the side of the highway to come pick them up and explain why their child was on the side of the highway, because that's what the cop wanted me to do. And I have no idea who that cop is, but I wish I could find him and thank him. Because that was the most uncomfortable thing I've ever had to do in my life, and most definitely made sure that I never stacked 12 people into an F-150 again, right? That happens, and I was sitting there, and I was thinking about this between the two presentations, right? Because I just gave this earlier this morning. And I was thinking, I was like, what was I thinking immediately after that happened? And I felt like I had just gotten my license suspended because of that ticket. I didn't understand why I didn't go to jail that night, because there were some other situations that were surrounding that I was like, I definitely should have ended up in a cell. And I was trying to process this. It's like, okay, well, this happened. Why did it happen? Why did I not get punished? Like, what was all this stuff? And then I remembered this conversation that I had with my grandpa right before he passed away. And right before he passed, he actually found a bottle of pills in my wrestling bag. And he kind of made an agreement with me, right? I remember sitting there, and he was like, listen, he was like, our family is consistently kind of been in the service, right? They were all Marines. He's like, I want you to join the Air Force, get your life together, and he was like, and I want you to get an education to be different. He was like, those are the three things. He was like, I know that you can do better than this. And he was like, I will take this to my grave. And I didn't realize it was going to be sooner than, you know, what we anticipated. But he was like, I'm not going to sit down and like have this conversation with your parents or talk to your mom and dad if I see you start to make a change. That was our agreement, right? And then a couple of months later, he passes away. And that's like one of the last real conversations I remember having with him. Was like, you need to be different. You need to go out and pursue this. And so I'm also kind of like, man, you knew. Like, you had a gut instinct that something was about to happen and you weren't going to be here anymore. And the last thing you do is charge me to be different? Really? I'm like, okay, so now I'm literally going to spend my entire life just trying to figure out what that means. And I sat there and I remembered that conversation after I got pulled over. My license was suspended at the time. I had to quit my job at Burger King because I didn't have a way to get to work. There's like all of these things that happened, and I was just like, well, okay, I guess this is it. But I decided that's not what I wanted for the rest of my life. I was like, I can't do this. I've tried this for years. I've tried changing myself to make other people happy. I've tried not being interested in the things that I'm interested in just to make sure that I fit in with other people. I tried not pushing myself hard because it's not cool to be a nerd, or it's not cool to be in choir while you're in sports. You know, there's like these things that I was like, why does any of this stuff actually matter? I want to pursue what I'm super excited about. Like, I need to find something that really sets me on fire in the morning, and that's what I want to do. Now if we want to scroll some more. So after all of that, right, all of these situations, hitting absolute rock bottom my senior year of high school, and not really having any idea what I wanted to do, I remember sitting down with some of the career counselors that were at Canton South at the time, and I was like, I don't know what I want to go to school for. They're like, well, what did your parents go to school for? Because that seems to be the default question. It's like, what did your parents do? Maybe you'll be interested in that. You kind of have the same genetics. You can go do that thing, right? And I was like, okay, well, my dad's a respiratory therapist. Like, maybe I'll go into nursing. And then in the back of my mind, I also had this message from my grandpa, right? He was like, you need to join the military. It's like, okay. So I ended up joining the Air National Guard, and in the course of 6 years became one of the most decorated sergeants in my unit. I got promoted every single promotion cycle at exactly when I was meant to be promoted. By the time I got done with my 6 years, I was a technical sergeant, which is 6 ranks up inside of the Air National Guard, and I had a team of 30 to 50 that I was in charge of leading at 19 years old. And that was insane. Like, within 2 years of kind of graduating and figuring stuff out, 19 to 20 years old, I'm working with this large group of people, and then 4 years later, I would be in charge of that large group of people. But literally 6 months prior to that, 8 months prior to that, I had no idea what I was going to do. But I took this kind of leap of faith and joined the military and figured that stuff out for me. And that was my path, right? That's not everybody's path, but that's how it worked for me. I've now worked with 3 different startup companies, one of which is my own. Over the last 2 years, I founded my own business. And then I work directly with 2 other startups, kind of helping them with their marketing, website design, influencers, marketing, and content creation, right? I started a podcast. We now have a little over 30,000 listeners. And then also built something where me and my little brother get to hang out all the time because he's my content guy. So if you know Sam Almasy, because I know that he is like a little bit further, or like graduated not too long ago, please don't hold that against me. Now, the cool part about this phase, right, is that as I was going through this portion, I had to go back and start thinking about all of the different things that had happened to me leading up to preparing me for this situation, right? I realized that when I was going through all of those things in rock bottom, that it was a blessing to be able to figure out what my mindset needed to be that early on, right? I know friends of mine that are in their 30s now that are just going through what I had to go through. It is a horrible situation. I'm not trying to say that it was, positive end-all be-all, because it's definitely not positive when you're going through it. But I know friends of mine that are starting to have that conversation with themselves about what do I want to do, how do I want to get to where I want to go, and they're in their 30s. It's way harder to try to move and pivot when you're there versus when you're 18. Right? And so I'm like, wow, like, okay, I had that conversation with myself at 18, 19 years old, not necessarily by choice, because the universe wanted me to have that conversation with myself, but it was a blessing in disguise when I reached that place. If you want to scroll up a little bit more. So what I want to talk about really is how I did that. How did I transition from this kid that had no idea what group he was going to fit in with, that really wasn't sure what he was passionate about or what made him excited, and was constantly figuring out negative ways to cope, to this person that was capable of working with startup founders, networking with people in Manhattan, and starting a podcast of his own, right? And I really think, honestly, when I go back and I look about the ways that I was able to transition and pivot my life at those periods of time, is because I was able to adopt an entrepreneurial mindset. And that's why that's what we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about now that you've kind of gotten to know a little bit of my background and my journey. So we're going to start by watching this YouTube video, and then I'm going to dive into 3 principles of the entrepreneurial mindset, and we're going to kind of go back and forth, okay? I think if we click on the link, it might pop up.
The apex of my life is my death. I want you all to close your eyes. These are the words of my squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Phil Brown. The first time I've heard these words, I was at a loss. They didn't make sense, and although they may seem a little morbid at first, I hope to show you in the short amount of time that I can hold your attention just how prolific these words are. The apex is the highest point of any given path or object. Imagine if today was your apex. Imagine if this day, this cap and gown, and this degree were the absolute peak of your life. This would mean that after today, the only direction you have to go is down. Today is far from your personal apex. Growing up, every time I left my house, my father would always look at me and say, remember, you're an Almasy. At the time, I had no idea what it meant and I couldn't appreciate it. But as I grew and I began to understand more, I began to feel a sense of pride in that last name. If you are proud of your last name moving forward, represent it well. Show the world that you are a force to be reckoned with. If you're not proud, change that perception. A Marine that served in Korea, my grandfather, was an extremely wise man. One thing he always told me was, don't chase the money. If you chase the money, you will lose yourself along the way. Chase what you're passionate about. You may not start at the top, but the money will come. And if you're passionate about it, you will find a place that you fit so well that it'll feel as though you haven't worked a single day in your life. Be the one from today moving forward, the generations from now, your grandchildren will listen to the chronicles of your life as a bedtime story. Give the future generations of your family something to look back on, something to be proud of. Life will beat you down. It will ravage your mind and make you feel completely useless at times. Sometimes, no matter how hard you work at something, you will feel as though you failed. The only way to truly fail is to quit trying. As we surrender today to the past and begin our futures, remember that this is only the first step. This is not your apex. And what you do moving forward is what will change the world. If you find something you're passionate about, Monday will be your favorite day of the week. Be proud of who you are and your unique abilities to positively affect everyone around you. Create a legacy that will continue to impact the world long after you have left it behind. Mark Batterson, author of a book called Chase the Lion, said your dreams should be so big that without God they are impossible to achieve. If you want the most out of the short time that we have on this planet, find your passion and chase it relentlessly.
Alright, I'm gonna finish drawing this real quick. Okay. Anybody have any thoughts on the video? Anything stand out? Anything you can relate to directly? Doesn't necessarily need to be an answer, just curious if anything stood out. Going once, going twice. Cool, moving on. Alright, so, wait, did that disappear? See if we can get it to pop back up.
The thing says no source.
Got it. Alright, let's see if that fixed it. Right, number one rule of IT, if it's not working, unplug it and plug it back in. Hey! Alright, cool. So, that video, right? Context of that video. I gave that speech when I graduated college, right? I won an award at Walsh University called the Tower of Excellence, and basically what that means is that you weren't the smartest one in the class, because that's the valedictorian. It definitely wasn't. I only had like a 3.2, maybe, when I graduated college. But it was kind of like you're the valedictorian of leadership. So it allowed me to give the commencement address, right? And inside of that address, I addressed the concept for the first time publicly that had been rolling around in my brain for literally years at that point, called the apex, right? And my entire premise behind that is that we each hit these perceived, apexes in our life. And the apex, by definition, is just the highest given point of any path or object, right? It means when something reaches that, literally by laws of physics, it cannot go any higher, right? Because that's its apex point. And my whole argument was like, well, how do you determine what your apex is? Are you the one that determines that? Or is there something else that kind of determines what that apex is? Because I know people that I'm friends with that their apex was throwing a game-winning touchdown senior year of high school, and I can promise you, at 26 years old, nobody cares. Right? And sometimes people carry that into their 50s. They're like, well, when I was in school, and it's like, okay, Gramps, like, maybe you should have done something else, right? And that shouldn't have been your apex. And for some people, their apex is graduating college. For others, it's, having your first kid or getting married. And my whole argument basically was that life is not a singular apex, right? That there's all of these different points where you reach a high moment, and then you can either go down, or you can kind of plateau and figure out where your next apex is, right? You reach this point of excitement, so like for you guys, juniors and seniors, graduation's coming up. That's an apex in your life, right? And my whole message in that video is like, don't let it be the last apex you ever hit, right? You're just getting started. When I graduated college, I felt like I was just getting started. When I started my company, I felt like I was just getting started. Life is literally just this perpetual motion of reaching an apex, and the ironic thing is that once you reach the top of one mountain, you realize you're at the bottom of the next one. And you get to constantly keep chasing and fall in love with this journey, right? So, 3 keys to the entrepreneurial mindset that will help you not only understand what an apex is, but also how to understand how to identify what the next one is, right? Once you reach it. So before we dive into these 3 principles, I want to talk about the difference between the way a fixed mindset works and the way the entrepreneurial mindset works when it comes to making a decision, right? A fixed mindset basically means it's checkbox, right? That's why I drew these checkboxes up there. So for some people, it might be checkbox number 1, I went to middle school, right? I'm going to relate it to you guys right now. Checkbox number 1, I went to middle school, right? Checkbox number 2, I went to high school, and now I'm about to graduate. Checkbox number 3 is whatever everybody else or the things that you feel are like, I need to do this in order to make everybody else happy, right? Like, okay, the next checkbox is probably going to college. At least when I was in school, that was like the number 1 thing that people pushed. It was like, you need to go to college, that's the next thing. So what is your degree? What do you want to do for the rest of your life? And I got so tired of hearing that question. You guys, there's some chairs over here if you guys want to grab these. And so I started thinking, I'm like, okay, but I don't know what I want to do for the rest of my life, right? Like 18 years old, I didn't know, like I had just gotten done with high school. I didn't even know what it was like to live on my own, right? I didn't live out in the real world. I was still with my parents. I was just kind of getting my feet wet with the world. And so when people would start to ask me that, I was like, I don't know what this next checkbox is. How can I check it off if I don't know what the next thing is that I want to do, right? And then you start to feel all this pressure. It's like, oh, well, obviously I'm a horrible person because I don't know what's going on. And it seems like everybody else around me knows what they want to do. But I can tell you one thing that I've learned when it comes to at least growing throughout these last couple of years, starting the company and all the other stuff, the majority of the time, other people are just as lost as you are. Some people are just hiding it better. Especially when you're all in the same age group, right? That's why, as humans, we need to have conversations with each other to figure stuff out. Because we really only ever have like 1 or 2 pieces of the puzzle. We need to be able to have friends and talk to teachers and lean on other people that could give us advice to try to put together the puzzle pieces, right? So this is what's different about the entrepreneurial mindset versus the fixed mindset, right? Do we all kind of grasp what the fixed mindset is?
It's like a fixed set of ideas you want.
Exactly, correct. So, entrepreneurial mindset. This little dot right here is intuition. Okay? I know that this is probably kind of hard to see, but that little dot in the beginning, that is the origin point of an idea, right? This is like right below your rib cage, right above your gut. You kind of feel it right in here, and sometimes it can feel like crippling anxiety because you're not exactly sure what decision you need to make, right? But I've always come to the conclusion that like that intuition sometimes is just being suppressed by your mind, right? Because your mind, as soon as that intuitive impulse happens, your heart is like, I'm passionate about this. I want to go do this. Your mind immediately is like, bruh, you ain't got the skills. Like, are you sure you're going to be capable of doing that? For me, my personal example was when I went to go join the military, literally everybody in my family was like, this is a horrible plan. Like, Senora Price knows, right? They're like, you're not going to be able to hold your shit together. Pardon my French. But like, you're not going to be able to figure it out. You're going to go there, and you're going to fail out of basic training, and all of this stuff's going to happen. You're going to come back, and I was like, guys, no, I could definitely pull this off, right? And so I had this intuitive impulse. Now, the fixed mindset would say, you're not checking the box that everybody wants you to check, so you're wrong, right? In like the entrepreneurial mindset, the next phase after you get that intuitive impulse is imagination. You get to take that idea and then break it apart into like 15 different potential possibilities, and you're like, okay, if I were to imagine me doing this, what are the different ways that I could get this accomplished with the resources that I have? Because that's one of the hardest things about entrepreneurship is like, I built my company with no funding. I never got any investment from anybody. I literally had like half of a Taco Bell burrito and a Diet Coke, right? And I'm like, okay, but I built that because I knew that I had these imagined possibilities. I was like, okay, this is what I'm working with. What is the one next step? And actually, Mr. Lachlan brought this up to me between presentations. It's like, I'm passionate about hearing people's stories, but hearing people's stories isn't gonna pay me money right now. So what is the very first step that I can take so that 5 years from now, I can get paid for telling people's stories? And for me, that very next step was starting a podcast. That was one of these imagined possibilities, right? So your job inside of you imagine all these things. Now these lines right here are logic and other people's opinions, okay? So you imagine all of these potential possibilities, right? You're like, I could go to school to do this. I could chase this. I could go to a trade school. I could do this. And your end goal is like whatever you paint it to be. For me, I want to be able to put gas in my truck without having to look at my credit card statement, right? And be broke. I want to be able to have a house. And I want to be able to responsibly raise a family someday. Like those are like my visions for the future. In order to do that, I have to have a stable job. I have to have a stable career. There's other prerequisites to that. So I imagine all those possibilities. I use logic, right? What are the tools that I have at my disposal right now? Not tools that I wish that I had, right? Not tools that all of these other Instagram influencers seem to have at their disposal, because I don't have a media team. I don't have a professional camera. I didn't have all this other stuff. I had one buddy that happened to be in a band, that had 2 microphones that didn't match, and a MacBook laptop. So we started a podcast. Right? And then I started asking other people. I'm like, hey, if you were going to start a podcast, what would you do? I have this kind of general idea of what I want to do. Like, I kind of want to talk about like ordinary people. I want to figure out their stories and what brought them to success. And but I'm not really sure what exact concept I want to nail down on this. And the only way I was able to get that is literally by asking dozens and dozens of people, what kind of podcasts do you listen to? Do you even listen to podcasts? I had to do what we call in the entrepreneurial space, I had to test my market, right? So your market is basically the group of people that you want to be able to try to exchange a service or product with, right? If you start a company. It's a whole bunch of people with a problem and you happen to have a solution. But if you have a solution to nobody's problem, no one's going to buy it, right? So I had to, even though I had all of this intuition and imagination, if I would have never went through this part where I was asking a whole bunch of other people if it was even a good idea, right, and used logic to kind of narrow down to the fact that I needed to start a podcast, one of my original ideas for my company was to build a physical building with a whole bunch of investment into computers and cameras and a podcast studio that I would have had to get, people to sign on. I would have a lease. I would have to buy a building. Like, I had all of these crazy dreams, right? I go up to Cleveland to pitch it at a competition and get torn to shreds. Because they were like, hey, we understand that this is a good idea in your imagination. There's no way this is going to work in the real world. And I had to take that, right? It's like, okay, first idea, not so good. Fixed mindset would tell you, I didn't check off the box. So obviously I was wrong. I'm just not going to try. Entrepreneurial mindset, all it did was start me back at the beginning. It's like, oh, I got all of my decisions torn down. Cool. What is my intuition telling me to explore next? Have you ever watched or heard anybody say fall in love with the journey, not the destination? Okay, who all has heard that before or understands what that concept is like? Okay, so a pretty good amount of people. Do you know why that is? Or take a guess at why it's important to fall in love with the process, not the journey or not the destination. But
So you don't like get absorbed into like the journey to where you're going.
partially, okay, we're getting closer. Anybody else got an input on that? Shoot.
So if it takes like a long time to get to the destination, you don't want to feel discouraged while in the process, so you want to basically follow the process. You get to, so you're always have fun with it.
Bingo. Yep. Did everybody hear that? Over here? Okay. I love that. The reason I love that is because the thing is that those outcomes, the destination, they might happen once a year, once every 5 years, once every quarter if you want to set goals, which is once every 3 months, right? They generally don't happen every day. And entrepreneurship is a long game. Life is a long game, right? And if you wake up every single day and you're constantly disappointed because you haven't hit the next objective, it's going to be really, really hard to sustain that for a long period of time. Because you're constantly going to be demotivating yourself. Whereas, if every day you wake up, and like right now, one of the ways that I engage with my company a lot is through writing. So every day I wake up and I get to do written copy for people. I get to help CEOs write their biographies. I get to help people write landing page copy for a website, which is when people write words on a website for sales funnels and getting to sell stuff to people. I get to write articles all the time for companies. And that's a passion of mine. And I enjoy drinking coffee and sitting at Mugswigs and typing stuff out. But that took me years to be able to get to. So we kind of getting the gist between the difference between these two, right? This is a lot more flexible, kind of allows you to use your gut and your heart and your mind all at the same time, whereas this one is just kind of like a checklist, right? Okay, so the 3 pillars that make this up. How many of you guys take purposeful time every week to shut your phone off? Go one hand. Anybody else? No? Okay. How much time on average is that a hand up?
I was gonna say I put it on do not disturb.
Okay, that's good. That works. Okay, do not disturb or airplane mode. I'll open it up to that instead of just shutting it off. Okay, a couple of more. Okay. I was like, man, tough crowd. So one of the reasons why that's super beneficial, right? Well, I'll just ask you, why do you put it on do not disturb?
So like I don't get stressed out. Like people texting me,
Yep.
I get notifications. I don't want to look at them. I want time for myself.
Right.
I'm sleepy.
Sleeping? Okay. Anybody who over here said do not disturb? Why? Just to not get notifications? Yeah.
There's nothing distracting. I don't really look around like my schoolwork or something like that.
So like times that you need to focus in, right? Okay, so this is what's super interesting, right? I think that phones and technology are probably one of the greatest things ever invented by humanity. I also think it's one of the worst things that was ever invented by humanity.
Yeah.
Okay? Because it's a double-edged sword, right? This first principle, the benefits of boredom. Why do you think I think it's good to be bored?
So you can think of ideas.
Right on the head. Okay, dude. I'm loving this. So you can think of ideas, right? That's the exact reason why boredom is so cool. All right? I realized a couple of years ago, I was spending like 7 to 9 hours a day on my phone. I'm like, hold on, that is a whole work day I'm spending on this device, right? How many people can relate to that? All right, like you scroll up and you like look at your health bar in your iPhone or whatever, and it's like you've been, it like
Your
reminds you to
battery's
get up
on.
and move.
Your battery's short.
Yeah, it's like, oh, or Netflix will stop and be like, are you still watching? I'm like, man, I just started. Like, I'm halfway through a bag of Lay's potato chips, and I'm like dead set on Emily in Paris, right? And I'm like, okay, but that's what technology is doing, right? It kind of sucks you in and pulls you in. Now, boredom is cool because what happens after about 30 minutes of disconnecting your phone, right? When you're not getting notifications, you're not getting pinged, you're not constantly trying to think of how to text a person back or thinking about the next part of a conversation, or anxious about something that showed up on social media that caught you doing something dumb. Like, what happens after just half an hour of shutting that phone off? You start to, like, these random thoughts start entering your brain, right? And you're like, oh, where did that come from, right? That's daydreaming, right? We talk about it a lot. I worked in childhood psych. We talk about a lot what daydreaming actually does. Daydreaming and boredom is the only time that your brain gets to process things that it hasn't already started to process in the background, right? You have these two things, right? Your conscious mind and your subconscious mind. When you're constantly picking up your phone and scrolling or playing video games or talking to somebody or you're with a group of people, your subconscious mind, where 90% of your processing happens, never gets a chance to bubble up. Which means that you never actually get to figure out what's going on in the back of your mind, which is where the majority of your answers are for yourself. Right? So if we get to this place where we're feeling like, oh, we have all of these options and I don't know what to do and nobody has any answers for me and I can't figure anything out, shut your phone off. For a couple of weeks, pick half an hour, once a day, shut it off, and just see what happens. Right? For me, when I do that, I do it every Saturday. I wake up in the morning and I don't look at my phone until 10 a.m. Right? For some people on a Saturday, they don't wake up till 10 a.m. But for me, yeah, for me, my body doesn't let me sleep in past like 8 nowadays, right? So I'm normally up at 8, and for the first couple of hours of the day, I have no contact with people. It's crazy the types of things that I'll come up with in that period of time. That's where I've come up with the majority of my ideas for the business. Any questions on boredom? Or why it's important? Are we kind of getting like why that's important in the mindset? Because that's where this starts, right? If you don't have boredom, it's going to be really hard to figure out what this first part of that entrepreneurial equation is. So, phase 2, self-acceptance and self-awareness. Okay? Who wants to try to say what self-awareness is? Going once. Going twice. Sold to me. So, self-awareness is basically what it says. Like the answer is in the statement, right? It's awareness of self. Okay? So all that really means is that you are now aware of something that really interests you. Like in the context of what we're talking about today, you have become aware of something that's a potential option for you, right? You've become aware of one of these bullet points. So you now have this intuitive impulse. Now the acceptance part is the hardest part, I think, for me. Because I know for a long time, I was personally stuck in the phase of awareness, but I hadn't accepted who I was yet. Right? Like I was aware that I was really passionate about writing. I was aware that I was really passionate about hearing other people's stories. I was aware that I was really ADHD and could not focus on math to save my life. Or Spanish. I just couldn't do it, man. Yeah, it's tough for me. I just can't sit and focus for that long. So I had all of those things that I realized about myself, right? Now, the acceptance phase was trying to figure out how do I take all of these things that I'm aware of and just accept the fact that this is going to be how it is, right? Like I'm never going to not be interested in writing or telling people stories. So I have to figure out either a way to incorporate that in my life as a hobby, or I need to figure out a way to incorporate that into my life as something that I want to start as a company. Now, I never pictured starting a business. So when I was in the nursing field, the way that I used to integrate writing and my passions into stuff is I started by just writing blog posts. I didn't know who was going to read them. I was just like, I really like this writing. I'm going to accept the fact that I like the writing, and I'm not going to let anybody tell me any different about whether it's dumb. Like, I just really love writing and recording. So the writing led to the podcast led to 30,000 listeners, that led to having a whole bunch of, business ideas and stuff. Now the big problems, big opportunities piece. So let's say you're bored, you get an idea, right? You become aware of that idea, you accept the fact that you want to pursue that idea, you imagine all of these potential ways you pursue it, you go and you try to start talking to other people, and they're like, oh, well that's a big problem nobody's been able to solve yet. I had a conversation with somebody not too long ago that was super anxious because they Googled something and couldn't find an answer. And I was like, no! I was like, that's the best thing. I was like, God forbid you had an original idea. Right? If you Google something and nothing shows up, you should get psyched. Because that means nobody else has thought of it yet. Right? That's a beautiful thing. And so for me, one of the big problems that I faced was, how do you turn a podcast into a company? Right? And I realized it wasn't the podcast. It was the storytelling. It was what I was originally passionate about all the way back here. All I had to do was figure out a way to do the storytelling piece. It wasn't even the podcast. And so the storytelling piece turned into building websites for people. The building websites thing turned into, okay, well now I need to hire somebody to help build these websites. That turned into a couple more people. And next thing I knew, I had a staff of 6, quit my nursing job, and now I just run my business full time, right? None of that would have been possible if I hadn't looked at this problem as an opportunity to solve something. Because the biggest problem that we had is when COVID hit, all of these businesses had to shut their doors. They couldn't afford an agency. They couldn't afford $4,000 a month. They were struggling to figure out how to even keep their doors open. That was a big problem, right? How do you solve that? You get a whole bunch of misfits together, which is like I like to call my team, we're the island of misfit toys, right? You get a whole bunch of people together that just are like, well, we're going to try to help where we can. We're going to take this tiny circle of influence that we have and just try to make a positive impact there. What ended up happening is that big problem of all those businesses shutting down, guess who they were calling to come take over their marketing when they all got loans?
You?
Me. I didn't know that that's how that was going to play out. But because I had this mindset that was like, hey, there's this big problem happening, I bet you we can find a solution. We went out and found it. So I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but I'm going to kind of leave that there and open it up to the floor for any questions. If you've thought about starting a business, if you don't know where you want to go, what's going on?
I have a question just about your business.
Shoot.
From all your stuff that you're talking about, what does your business do specifically?
So we specialize in digital revenue development. So basically, in layman's terms, like if a company has a product or a service that they want to sell online, not in person, we help them come up with the design, the messaging, the website, the e-commerce, the social media, like pretty much everything that surrounds that product, and then we help them launch it to the public. So everything from research as to whether or not it's actually a good product to sell, to actually helping them record the videos to launch their first commercial.
Can you talk about the other companies you work with?
Yeah, so one of the companies that we work with, it's actually local, is called Ripple. There's a kid named Joey Knott. He went to East Canton High School, went to Walsh, and me and him met there. He started a water bottle company that's very similar to Hydro Flask or Yeti. It's actually the same manufacturer, except out of California. They are creating a universal anti-venom and a universal flu vaccine. And I work with their executives to help them write because, I was a nurse before I was a copywriter. So I know how to speak medical, but make it sound like normal people. Because their biggest issue is they're too sciencey. They'll write something and nobody knows what it says. So they need me. Any other questions?
How does the podcast come into play?
So the podcast is actually what allowed for the business to kind of grow. So the podcast, I started that in 2017 after all of the suicides happened in Stark County. It started off with literally me begging people to come on the show. And then next thing I knew, we were like 10, 15 episodes deep, and I realized like, oh, I can call somebody that is really interesting. It's actually how I landed the biotech job. So I watched a documentary on Netflix. This is how crazy the world can be, right? If you just put stuff out there. I watched this documentary on Netflix. I was like, wow, this scientist is really, really cool. I would love to talk to him. I was like, hey, I'm a nurse that has a podcast. You should come on my show. I interview him. He had such a good experience that he wanted me to interview his team. They were trying to figure out how to get their message out into the world. And I told him, listen, I have no experience in doing this. I have never been a PR manager before in my life, but let me work for you for free for 60 days, and I'll figure something out. 60 days later, he's still one of my largest long-term retainers.
Guys, I hate to end this, but we need to get through the last one